This is Douglas Wynne, author of the Spectrophiles series, and you're listening to Legends of Tabletop.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Welcome, everybody. So our latest episode, we ran into Doug at Necronomicon in this couple of months ago, and again in 13. Although I don't think we talked very much in 13, as we were busy scrambling, try to get all the RPG guys under one spot so we can get them on here.
It's a busy convention, man. There's so many people I want to see there that I catch them in passing and hope that we'll sync up. But it takes over the town.
Yeah, I got in on Wednesday night, and come Friday, it's like, man, it's almost over, and I feel like we didn't do anything. So like you said, you catch people for a minute here or there, you stop somebody in the hallway, and trying to take in a couple of panels or whatever. It seems to blow right by.
Yeah, it's mayhem in a good way.
Yeah, definitely. How was this year's Necro for you? Is it as good as 13 or?
Yeah, it was great. I've been enjoying. I like that they do it every other year. It kind of I'm sure it's a huge undertaking. They put an enormous amount of work into it. The organizers, I think, would end up in an asylum if they try to do it every year. But even just for people like us who get to enjoy it and participate a little, it's good to have that extra time, I think, to I can have another book out maybe before the next time Necronomicon comes around, and there's just you've got more cumulative stuff to catch up with people on, so that's nice. I had a great time, really had a blast. I've enjoyed how the first time I went was 3 cons ago, so it was the first time that they were doing it, I think, after reviving it, and I didn't know anybody. And I just wanted to meet a couple of people that I had talked to online. But each year, they've been really generously including me more and more. And so now it's like it's like a homecoming. It's just got so many friends in that community that I look forward to seeing there. So yeah, great time.
Yeah, absolutely. The first year we went, it was like we were just kind of jumping into podcasting and the website and everything. So it's, kind of trepidatiously approaching people. I'm like, I'm so-and-so, and we're kind of doing a thing. And everybody's like, oh, yeah, sure, great. Whatever. Friend me on Facebook, send me an email, whatever. Everybody's very welcoming. It's a very cool community to be a part of.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you were on like 4 or 5 panels this year. Do you enjoy doing the panels when you come in? Is it something you look forward to, or is it more like?
No, I do. I definitely enjoy that. It's they tend to use me as much as as I say I'm willing, and usually the topics are so cool that I'll respond with like, oh yeah, this bunch of them look like things I could maybe contribute something to, but that's with the hope that maybe I'll end up on, 2 or 3. But lately it's been like 4. Yeah. So that's a lot of running around, but it's always fun in the end. The tough thing I think is if you have to moderate something, then there's more homework to do, more research to do. I try to be prepared. But this year, the one that they threw at me to moderate last minute, I was going to be on it, and then the moderator fell through, so they asked me to moderate the Faithful Frighteners panel, which was about religious horror and whether or not atheists can be scared by horror that uses religious tropes and stuff. Exploring those kinds of themes, which I thought was really interesting. Where usually we end up talking Lovecraft and mythos and this year they broadened the scope of the convention more than ever before, and we're looking at other influential authors like Shirley Jackson and Arthur Machen. So yeah, getting to have a discussion about things that go beyond the mythos. As much as I enjoy those other ones, it was fun to branch out. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I moderated 2. This first time I had ever done it, I moderated 2 panels. It was like, oh, because Niels was like, well, do you want to moderate? And I'm like, I don't like, maybe, I guess so.
you know the gig. So what did you end up moderating?
It was podcasting for gaming and technology in gaming.
Cool.
We do a ton of gaming for the podcast, so.
Yeah, good. And it went well. You had a good time?
Yeah, it was good. It wasn't as terrifying as I thought it was going to be. We got a small but decent crowd. Everybody was was engaged with questions and stuff, and it was fun. I'm looking forward to hopefully pitching something again, for the next Necro. I'm doing a panel of podcasting 101 for our local Tucson Comic-Con coming up in a couple of weeks.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I'm all in at this point.
Yeah. Maybe, I'm sure you'll get ideas from each of those experiences that you'll apply to the next one, right? So that's fun.
Yeah. So let's jump out. So you have a book that just came out, like 5-6 days ago, Cthulhu Blues. How's that going?
Yeah, almost a week ago, last Friday, Cthulhu Blues was released, and it's been a fun week getting it out there finally. The third book in my Spectre Files trilogy, so this completes that story. Each book kind of has its own standalone story arc within it, but by the time we got to this third one, it's seeds that I planted in the first book, Red Equinox, are finally coming to fruition. And so I got to have the big climactic wrap up. That was great. And so it seems well received so far. It's people are just digging into it now, but I've got a reading tomorrow night at a bookstore and another one the following week. Some of my favorite indie bookstores around here that usually have me in for these. So it'll be fun to get out there and celebrate the book. Yeah.
That's cool. Well, I read online that you don't really outline. So seeds that you've sown in Red Equinox, is that how does that work if you're not outlining? Did you originally plan on doing it as a trilogy, or did it just sort of morph after the first book?
I had an idea that it could be. So I wrote, the ending of Red Equinox with not exactly a big cliffhanger, but definitely with the suggestion that more horrible things could emerge. When that book did well, my publisher said, this would make a good series. Have you considered, doing more of these? And I was already thinking along those lines. So I knew there were things I wanted to dig deeper into and explore if I had the chance. I feel like Red Equinox it's a book that you can read and get an ending with a little bit of horror, unsettling, possibilities dangled there at the end. But some of those threads from Red Equinox I didn't fully develop until this third book. There's in book 2, Black January, we have a story that continues the idea of the Spectre Agency, which is the special physics emergent counter terror recon agency, right? It's kind of a joke on how these government, mouthful agencies,
right.
Spy agencies are dealing with, all kinds of surveillance now, and these guys look into weird physics, particularly Lovecraftian type stuff. So in the second book, they investigate a weird house that has shifting architecture. It's sort of in this liminal place with regards to space and time. So my main character, Becca, who is not a government agent, but who becomes a consultant for this agency after being kind of thrown into a helicopter with a black bag over her head when she first encounters them. By book 2, she's got a bit of a working relationship with these guys that she doesn't always entirely trust. So that book mainly focuses on the house. It introduces a piece of music that has occult properties that Becca's father studied. But we only take a little bit of a detour in book 2 to look at these children who were born with special talents as a result of the events of book 1. In book 3, I finally got to really deal with those kids, which was the thing I kind of left dangling at the end of Red Equinox, and knew I would eventually develop into the big storyline. So it was interesting to try to, sorry, rambling here, but to get back to your question about outlining. It's a very intuitive process for me, and I will plan ahead a little bit at a time. I'll do forecasts of what might happen in the next 30,000 words. What if this happened? What if that happened? Make a lot of notes like that are kind of rough outline, and that is often subject to change. So it was a little bit of a high wire act to put some things out there in the first book that I thought I could likely explore in sequels, but I didn't know how those things would necessarily resolve or develop. But I don't know that when I'm writing a single book. But with a single book, I can go back after
Yeah.
draft one and, kind of reverse engineer some things. A little bit more risky with books already out there in print, and
Yeah.
you've got to make sure you're consistent while still improvising a little. But that's part of the fun for me. If I plan everything, I'd get bored, and I'd feel like the life got sucked out of the story because I know what's going to happen. I kind of need to be a little bit intrigued and mystified by what's going to happen, even if I have a hunch about it, for me to stay excited.
Okay. Well, that leads me to, I was jotting down a question and you kind of answered that already. So do you, kind of like maybe when, start a story and, you think it's kind of go in this direction, but then the characters, sort of find their own voice and sort of shift you maybe in another direction from what you originally thought the story might go?
Yes, that's a pretty common occurrence. A lot of things sound like good ideas to me when I jot down a little note and I have this vague sense that I want to steer the story in a certain direction. But I think my favorite writers are typically the ones who let character drive the story. Character motivation, for me, is the most interesting thing about storytelling. And when you put a character with interesting motives and problems, interesting drives into a high pressure situation, then watching how they react against those pressures is really where the life of the story comes from. So often I'll find out that when I get to writing a scene that I thought I knew what's going to happen, it just doesn't feel right for that character at that time. By everything I know about that character, by the time they arrive at that place and time, I just realize if I'm going to be true to who they are, which is my top priority, then no, it's actually going to go this way a little. It's often consistent with my ideas, but probably in the specifics, not quite what I had planned.
Okay. So coming into Necronomicon, I should be somewhat ashamed. My weird fiction collection was relatively small. So I tried to rectify that at this last Necro. So, and I picked up some books by Cody Goodfellow, and I picked up your book, and Larry. I mean, your publisher was giving away books for like a nickel. It's like, hey, give me a $1 and I'll give you like 30 books. I don't want to take these home. So like, it was a great deal.
By the end of the weekend, yeah, he was really trying to empty the table as kind of a promotional effort, so he didn't have to drive that stuff back. Yeah,
Yeah.
he did a long drive. Gave away a lot of copies of my second book to promote this third one. So that was a nice boost for things and to just the right audience.
Yeah, it was cool. So it was the first thing I had read from you, and like right from the opening introduction, like full on. Full mythos, like just every, the house, the music, the piano, the other dimensions, like, I'm picking up, cool. Like, oh my, holy cow. Like we're in, we're all in. This is it.
Oh, good. Yeah. You don't have much time to waste when you want to hook a reader. There's so much to read, as you just mentioned. It's just, we're living in a great time for weird fiction, small press fiction, indie horror in general. There's just so much good stuff out there. I'll never get to it all.
It's more of like more of a pulpy than like a traditional, say Lovecraft, but like, all the elements, which I thought was just great. Cool. Like you said, it really hooked me coming in. So like now I'm kicking myself like, crap, I should have picked up the other books while I was there. So now I gotta, like Vincent O'Neill, he gave me a book for free as we were, heading out like on the last day. He's like, oh, do you read military sci-fi? Here, just take this. I'm like, oh, okay. So I read that one. I'm like, God damn you. Like, now I got to go and pick up the other books. Like, come on, guys.
Yeah, that's part of what we're doing there. But it's nice to come home with a, jam-packed bag full of new books.
Yeah, for sure. I was worried that I might have to pay the extra fee for the flight.
Oh, yeah, excess baggage.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could happen.
Cool. So when did you start writing, and at what point did you decide that you wanted to pursue this as more of a professional endeavor?
I started writing when I was in my young teens. The books that really opened up my interest in just my love for storytelling and my desire to do it myself was a sixth grade teacher introduced us to The Hobbit, and so from there, The Lord of the Rings, follows immediately. Read that over the summer. After that, upon finishing The Lord of the Rings, a friend of mine at the time had a dad who was a book critic, and they had just shelves and shelves. Their house was just a library of music and books, and a lot of hardcover Stephen King first editions. So my friend hands me The Stand right after Return of the King, and says, "Well, if you liked that, you'll love this."
Right.
And it's true that the spirit is kind of the same. I think King himself, it's his birthday. I'm wearing my my Dark Tower shirt today.
Yeah.
Just to pay some homage to his influence. That book, I know so many horror writers who that was the one. The Stand was the one, and it really is sort of like Lord of the Rings in modern America. This darker, grittier version of the epic fantasy quest, right? So, after that, I just read everything I get my hands on by him, Peter Straub, Clive Barker, and then started going back and looking at H.P. Lovecraft. I had already been a fan of Poe and Bradbury. My grandmother got me into some of those when she saw that I was interested in darker things.
Yeah.
So I started writing short stories when I was like probably 14, maybe 13. I wrote a novel in high school that is probably horrible, what you now call urban fantasy, maybe. I'm terrified to even find out how bad that is, but it was exhilarating to go through that first process, writing it by hand. I had started other things that I get like a chapter one and never finish it, but that was the first time that I was completely lost in creating a long form story and watching it unfold. Again, without really planning it much. That was such a thrill. But then I got seduced by the electric guitar and ended up playing in bands, going to music school, becoming a recording engineer. Just a long winding journey through music that eventually. When I got burnt out on the music business, moved away from Woodstock, New York, where I was working in a studio, and landed in my wife's hometown, which is Newburyport, where H.P. Lovecraft set, was maybe the inspiration of The Shadow over Innsmouth. I finally got back to writing because you can do that without a band. You can do the one-man creativity thing as a writer. And it took a long time to get the first book that I attempted finished, and that went through like 9 drafts before I started trying to learn about the business and made some effort to pitch that to agents and small presses. But that first book I did land with my current publisher, Journal Stone. So a long winding road to finally getting back to writing.
Yeah. When did you first discover Lovecraft? You talk about King and The Hobbit and all that stuff. Was he one of the early influences on you, or was it more like what you said, Stephen King and Tolkien? And
right, I went back to I found Lovecraft through that interest in the horror writers of the '80s who would mention him. Stephen King, Peter Straub. It always reminded me kind of like. You're listening to bands that you love and find out that, the guy they listened to, the guitar player who influenced the guy I think is awesome. I got to hear him now. What did he do that has filtered its way into the newer stuff? So ironically, it was kind of like going back to find the blues man who might have had that influence. There's like a paperback of Lovecraft stories out at the time, some really cheap edition with a horrible bloody cover on it. Was my introduction to Lovecraft. I think it was The Lurking Fear and Other Stories might have been what they slapped on that for a title.
Right.
But yeah, since then I've obviously gotten much deeper into his whole body of work, especially when I started writing in the mythos. And then the novels, I always wanted to do something Lovecraftian. It was one subgenre that I knew I would eventually play with because it just, turns me on. But once you dabble in Lovecraft, I've noticed, people keep asking you to do more Lovecraft, so all these editors will, pitch things for anthologies, which are pretty viable. As small press books go, I think Lovecraftian anthologies have proven that they tend to sell. So yeah, the deeper you go, the deeper you have to go, and yeah, now it's a thrill. I've studied a lot of critical commentaries on his stuff, the annotated editions, and I'm at the point now where I kind of look forward to moving back into other areas of horror and kind of trying to extract myself just a little bit from the mythos. Having finished this trilogy, there's other things I want to do now.
Sure. I mean, it's like anything, you got to catch a little bit of a break and, come back to it with fresh eyes a little bit later on and, kind of expunge it a little bit.
Right.
Do you have any kind of rituals or anything when you're writing? You try to write at a certain time, you eschew the computer and, have a thing for a longhand or what's your process like?
There aren't any real rituals or rules for how I get it done. The word count is the key motivational tool. Just trying to keep track, trying to set a goal for however many words, and try to set, even if I don't have a deadline from a publisher, imposing personal deadlines, and doing the math. I use Scrivener these days. I started, the first novel that I wrote, I did longhand, and it took me like 5 years to do the first draft. And I was dabbling. I'd do a little bit. I'd work on it for a while. I'd set it aside. I'd come back to it. Increasingly, there are deadlines that really put. They do wonders for your focus, right? So I can't, as much as I'd like to get back to writing something longhand eventually, and I think I will. I've had to find tools that'll help me not waste a lot of time. Scrivener is one of those. That's a program that will track my word count, and if I tell it what my deadline is, then it'll calculate for me with a little meter that turns green as I, from red to green as I get closer to that daily word count. So I know how much I've got to hit each day if I'm going to hit the deadline. But beyond that, I just, I run a small business. I've got a young kid. Thank God he's back in school right now. Summers are, I'm kind of stay-at-home dad, work-at-home guy. Don't get anything done.
Right.
So whenever I can fit it in, really, I try to write in the morning because I'm more focused in the morning. My head is fresh. That's not always feasible if I'm not getting up super early. So yeah, whatever it takes to get those words down. And then I love revision, because then I can see all the possibilities for connections in the story, things I can enhance. It reminds me of mixing music, where you want to bring out certain themes. You maybe want to mute some other things to make space where there wasn't. So that's a lot of fun for me, that part of it.
Do you try to write every day? I mean, is that a key to it? If you can.
If I'm working on a book, then yeah. There are definitely phases, because I, have like most writers, a lot of other commitments and responsibilities besides writing. I'm not writing full time as my main source of income. So I'll have to really kind of prioritize only so much time for the writing career part of my life. So if I'm not writing the first draft of a book, then there might be a month where I'm just editing every day, but not generating new text on something. Or I might be like right now, I'm kind of in a mode of promoting every day. And yeah, there's a lot of writing involved in getting word out about a book also, and appearances and stuff. So yeah, I go through cycles like that. But I think that's also kind of healthy too, because I get to use different parts of my brain in sort of revolving sequence. And when I do get back to writing every day for a new project, then I can just totally focus, and that's fun.
Cool. Talking about, maybe muting some themes and, maybe bring other things ahead. Do you ever, when you sit down to write, do you think like, I want to try to, make a corollary of this thing that's happening today? Like, take the election, but, it's a medieval fantasy thing, but you're really trying to reference, a current thing in, everyday life. Is that, or you just tell a story and then maybe those things sort of express themselves as you're writing, as someone who, consumes media and exists?
Yeah, for me, it's much more the latter, what you're talking about. There are definitely political elements and ideas that as a human, as a writer, I am interested in exploring, but I think it's not what we're here to do. I'm here first and foremost to tell an entertaining story, make you care about a character. If as a consequence of caring about that character's predicaments, you are also, mulling over some aspects of a thing that applies to your current events. Great. I definitely want the fiction to be rich with all of the things that are part of the world we live in, but and especially with the spy, a spy trilogy, covert agency. There was a lot of commentary in this on aspects of things like the war on terrorism, tactics like torture and surveillance, and I certainly have a lot in this series that touches on that with Lovecraft and all of his racial baggage. I knew that there were things that I wanted to go against the grain of, that I wanted to play with, but I didn't want it to be allegory. I didn't want it to be a vehicle for some kind of political agenda. For me, it's much more important that I follow what the story needs and what the characters need. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I try not to let those things drive the story.
Yeah, I mean, I want, because sitting in some of the panels and stuff, and reading, like, say, some of the annotated works and things like that, and they'll pick out certain things. You see, well, at this time, blah blah blah, and this is what was going on, and in the world, and you can see corollaries. And I just, I wonder, as a non-writer, if that's something that is, and I guess depends on the writer. Is that an intentional thing, or is that just sort of a byproduct of
right,
your life and your.
Sure. I knew that in taking on Lovecraft at this time, the thing that kind of fascinated me was how little our fears as a society have changed since the 1920s, when he was writing, and all of that xenophobic paranoia that he had about immigrants and the other, and a lot of that stuff. You'll hear plenty of insightful commentary about how his fears that he projects, that he expresses through the exotic, alien monsters, is really related to fears of alien people. I knew that those were going to be the themes at the heart of what I was doing, but once you set the parameters of something like that, and that, okay, here's why I'm in. Here's what's going to keep me invested and interested in this story, is all of this thematic resonance that's just built into my premise. I think once you've got that, it's going to enrich the story in all kinds of ways that hopefully are at times subtle, and at times might be as blunt as a sledgehammer. But you don't have to think about all of that and try to prove anything. I think once it's built into the story, the interesting thing is just seeing where all of those variables lead you by just bumping into each other, the way that they're just going to do.
Okay. And you kind of touched on a question that I jotted down just like right before the interview. Your protagonist, your female protagonist, Becca, is like the anti-Lovecraftian protagonist. Now, was that an intentional sort of thing? I mean, you've got Jason Brooks, who's also the other main character, and takes a similar prominent role in the story, but she's really kind of the glue that holds everything together. Through at least the first two books. I haven't read the last one. So was that an intentional design? Like, even her grandmother too is a strong female character, although it's more of an allusion to her. Like her father left and, kind of disappeared. So, yeah, I mean, it's noticeable. And I thought that was cool to kind of like sort of take that and flip it on its head a little bit.
Yeah, thanks. It's definitely, one of the intentions I had was to go against the grain of the typical protagonist Lovecraft himself would have had. So there's a real dearth of female characters in his fiction at large. So I knew I wanted a female protagonist. I had written a couple of books with male protagonists. I felt like I was ready to branch out and work with a female lead. So part of these, decisions are just personal, like, oh, I want to try something new for me right now. But yeah, part of it was I had sort of a list of Lovecraftian tropes that I knew I wanted to play with because they're fun. And I had a list of Lovecraftian cliches that I wanted to avoid. And I also had this list of places where I knew I was going to deliberately defy his own tendencies and go against the grain of that. But yeah, Becca, I found her interesting because she deals with depression. She has a difficult family history. She has trust issues. So I knew that there was enough psychological complexity there that when she encountered these things that drive people mad and that tend to shatter your worldview, I thought she would be in some ways more resilient than someone who had it all together, because she's already kind of used to not thinking she's got it all sorted out. She's got a unique way of looking at things. So yeah, she's the main character through all three books, and Brooks, is sort of your Boston homeboy, Irish cop turned government, spook. So even he is not quite your typical like academic hero that you would find in Lovecraftian fiction. I finally do bring in a more traditional, in book 3, this new book. There is a professor at Miskatonic who used to be a friend of Becca's grandmother when she was alive, and he's about as close as I get to the sort of putting a Lovecraftian stamp of standard character, but he's not from central casting either. He's kind of, I don't know, peculiar, but yeah, that was part of the intention. Go with a sort of unusual cast and a more diverse cast than you typically get from Lovecraftian stuff.
Cool. Is it difficult to write in that different voice then? So obviously being a guy, do you look outside, do you go to your wife and be like, I was thinking about, portraying this way, or because we, obviously see things from a certain perspective. So how difficult is that to bring that to life and make it, seem like it's, real, air quotes.
Yeah, I love writing dialogue. I think that's one of the more fun parts of this job is really getting inside a character's head who is different from you and trying to find their voice, their way of looking at things. I have to admit, with Becca, and I've said this before, I loosely modeled her on a younger version of my wife, who is also a photographer. But the more I wrote Becca, the more she became her own person. And when I see her, when I visualize her, I don't see my wife, even that younger version of her. She's definitely become her own person. She's found her own voice along the way, especially after all the shit I've put her through over 3 books. Yeah, she's grown in her own way.
Cool. Has writing become any easier over the years for you, or is it still, sort of a struggle to get, virtual pen to paper or, fingers to keyboards?
I think it's gotten easier. I think with practice, anything gets easier. So just doing a lot of it, just it kind of, for me, breaks down the resistance that I don't know if other writers experience quite this in this way, but there's always a certain amount of internal resistance for me in starting a new project. It's all of those fears that it's going to be horrible, that it's going to fail. So I get that before I start a first draft. I get it again before I do my revision, my first revision pass. This resistance that, oh, now I'm going to read what I wrote, and what if it sucks? You know, I'm going to discover now how badly it sucks. But the more you go through the process over and over again, I think it's just natural that a certain amount of confidence develops from just from the evidence that, well, I've done this before and it worked out. People liked it, and I finished it. So that reinforces that somehow you'll find your way through it. And every book is different. Every book is, you know, has its own challenges. And I definitely struggle. You know, I've got good days and bad days about self-confidence and self-doubt, like any writer, I think. But yeah, it gets easier, I would say. It should.
Yeah, you hope. Do you find that there's any parallel between being a musician and being a writer? Is there any sort of crossover or cross-pollination that happens there?
Yes, for me. I think music uses a different part of the brain than writing prose. I spent a lot of time writing lyrics in bands and as a singer-songwriter. So even though I started out writing fiction as a teen, when I got into music, it was always as a songwriter first and foremost. So there was always, over all those years, that I was mainly doing music as you know, whether it was as a singer-songwriter or in a rock band. I was always thinking about, lyrics were very important to me, and I was always attracted to songwriters who had strong lyrics. Those were the ones who had the biggest influence on me. So I feel I've always been processing words and always thinking about the musicality of words, the rhythm of words, the sound of them. And if anything, as a fiction writer, my more recent process has been about developing story and character, and maybe having a lighter touch with language and learning how to make things simpler and cleaner, you know, where the words and the music in the words draws less attention to itself. But there are musical themes in all of these books, strong aspects of how sound has magical properties in the Spectrophile series. My first novel, The Devil of Echo Lake, was about a rock star who isn't sure if he's burnt out and losing his mind because he thinks his producer is the devil, or if that's what's really going on. And is this old church that has been converted into a recording studio actually haunted by a dead witch? So everything that I had been immersed in as a musician and as a recording engineer got turned into the sort of fertilizer for that first novel, where I was, to some extent, deconstructing the music business and my experience of it and trying to make some sense out of that in a, you know, sort of therapeutic, semi-autobiographical, you know, almost allegorical way. So yeah, music, I can't get away from music no matter what.
Cool, very cool. How do you think the world of traditional publishing, in your opinion, you know, is affected by this new small press and self-publishing? You know, the bigger houses. Do you think they care at all? Like, you know, we have this resurgence in weird fiction. I mean, you know, you see them snapping their head around and going, oh, you know, we need to jump on this. Like in music, oh, we have Britney Spears, so we need, you know, 47 artists that sound exactly the same. Or do you guys have like a lot more leeway and freedom as a smaller press?
That's a great question. I'm kind of waiting to see how that pans out. I don't see evidence that the big five publishers are trying to scoop up weird fiction. I think by definition, weird is something that they understand is maybe a niche market. Are you gonna really hit those bestseller lists, people who buy the girl on the girl from the girl in the, you know, all, you know, is weird really going to reach those kinds of sales figures that big five publishers want to see? I kind of don't think so. Is there room for it to grow and to break into the mainstream and for mainstream stories to be influenced by it? I think, yes, we're seeing that, and I think we'll continue to see more of that. There's definitely been a real spike in the popularity of Lovecraft mythos, pop culture, everything. And you know it as a gamer.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's hit its peak yet either, but the weird movement has certainly moved well beyond Lovecraft. There's so many interesting things going on with weird fiction now. New writers are really expanding the boundaries of that. I think small presses give us a lot of freedom to try new things. Try different kinds of stories. It's a lot more risk friendly than huge publishing companies. My publisher's been great to me for giving me they never tell me what to write. I think they can see what may be more marketable, this or that. Certain ideas may have a better shot, but even down to the cover art, I get a lot of input. I get to really work closely. I've been very fortunate in that regard. That's not very common to be able to influence things on that micro level. I'm a bit of a control freak, so it's nice that I get to have some input even on that level.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Do you think that social media has a big influence on small press? More so obviously than the bigger houses.
Great question. I think yes. I'm on social media a lot with a community of other writers, and that can be a really supportive and encouraging community. I find it to be very positive for me. I tend to avoid drama wherever possible. I know a lot of writers get entangled in some really ugly and just time-sucking drama on social media. But just in terms of the community of weird fiction and horror fiction writers who are interacting and sharing ideas and observations about all this stuff, I sometimes wonder if it's a little, it helps you to have your ear to the wall and know what's going on in the marketplace, and maybe find some opportunities. What are some good submission calls right now? Who's working on what? The networking is important for especially small press authors who have to do almost all of their own marketing. So a lot of positives, but the thing I do wonder is it might be too easy to think that because certain things like weird fiction, certain styles, certain genres are very popular among your what feels like a very big group of enthusiastic reader and writer friends who love weird fiction or love horror, it's easy to think maybe that stuff is more viable than it is in the larger culture, and in the mainstream. So I try to keep that in perspective too, that we're all kind of delicate, insecure creatures who think, oh man, my friend just, they're getting published with this idea, or they just got a movie deal with that idea. I should do something like that. To me, that's the danger of social media, is finding some kind of creative integrity of your own, where you're not, yes, it's good to be aware of these shifting winds, but you kind of you've got to do what you find exciting and vital, and what you can contribute something to without being kind of tempted to follow someone else's path. And that's I think one of the big pitfalls there.
Sure. I think they've done studies on that now, where people who are on Facebook are less happier than people who, don't use Facebook and other social medias, because you get, caught up in that whole thing. What are the Joneses doing? So it can be a double-edged sword. Same thing for the podcast too. You see, a lot of it's word of mouth too. So not only on your side of it, trying to find out what's going on and find out submission, who's taking stories and things like that, but also for word of mouth, like, hey, I read this cool book and here's the author's page, or whatever, you should check them out. I think, like, it's again the same thing for podcasts. Like, if you enjoy something, if you like something, and this is a call to the audience, I guess, support it. Do the reviews. Reviews on Amazon for authors is like, it's so key to get those books noticed and get them further up in the stats. So like that aspect is, you have to depend on that so much to to kind of get things out there and sort of get things noticed.
Absolutely. That's the wonderful thing about it, that's helping so many small presses thrive right now, and so many subcultures to thrive, is how effective that world is for sharing your enthusiasm with your friends and getting the word out about cool stuff. That's what I enjoy about going on there, not to be advertised to by somebody, but to hear from people I respect what they're, what do you dig? What are you into right now? What are you watching? What are you listening to? What are you reading? And yeah, that's really what keeps, that's what makes it, writing reviews or just sharing a post about something that you loved is what lets creators, especially independent creators, continue to do this. It's yeah, so important.
Mm-hmm. And I've said this before, but like, for me, I take that so seriously, being a podcaster, because not that we're selling 1 million books for anybody, or pushing Kickstarters over their funding limits or whatever, but to be, to serve as a platform for someone to come on, especially cool people like like you and all these people that we've had come on. I mean, we've never had a bad experience with a guest. I mean, you bring people on, and like, cool, we share a thing for weird fiction, or gaming, or whatever it is. So you just you start with a common platform, and just are able to have a really cool conversation. Then you hope that people enjoy that, and then they go out and check out the things, like, oh, that sounds cool, or that guy sounds cool, let me go check out his stuff. And then you get them with that first one, you reel them in, and you hope they stick around.
Yeah, it's great. No, really, I was psyched that we met at the con, and got to continue the kind of conversations that we all have in places like that when we can physically get together. It's fantastic that that's something that I can do right from my office now. That wasn't really viable for a generation of writers, even in the 90s. I'm not sure how, I was doing music at the time, but I'm not sure how the small press horror scene, how the community communicated at that time without stuff like this.
Yeah, long letters.
Right.
So how does weird fiction relate to fabulism? Is it, I don't, so I, going to some of these panels and things, hear a lot of these things turn around, and I'm just sitting in the back like, what the hell are they talking about?
Both of those terms are probably defined differently by different writers and readers. Genre labels, I'm always a little bit suspect of. Fabulism, Peter Straub was on an interesting panel about fabulism with Nnedi Okorafor and others at Necronomicon. I thought that was a really interesting panel, but one thing I wanted to hear them maybe get into a little bit more that was part of the topic description in the program was fabulism as it relates to fables, right? And
Right.
and there's a lot of hair splitting about fabulism versus magical realism, and how much the fantasy element matters, and how far you can go into fantasy elements before it ceases to be one thing and becomes another thing.
Yeah.
But I beyond fantasy elements, I'm interested in fabulism in terms of what do we get from fables that is vital to storytelling, and why is that vital? And I think if I can try to wrap this into your other part of your question about the mythos, the mythos is kind of, I've heard it called an anti-mythology. Lovecraft, I think, was aware that mankind uses myths as a way of easing his anxiety about the unknown, right? If you can imagine a set of gods who are behind these natural forces, then maybe you have some sense of security about your place in the universe. So the Cthulhu mythos tries to do quite the opposite, which is create more anxiety.
Right.
The fact that maybe these forces are blind to you, indifferent to you, or worse, would consider you, a little morsel. That in the face of an infinite cosmos, that your level of intelligence and effectiveness is so minuscule that it should drive you insane. So he's kind of doing the opposite of what myths and fables have done for us traditionally. And I am a fan of stories that use mythic and fabulous elements. I'm a big fan of the Star Wars films. I'm a big fan of, as I mentioned earlier, The Lord of the Rings, where Tolkien was trying to create kind of a mythology of Britain that he felt didn't really exist in the first place. He's got his creation story and everything in the Silmarillion. I haven't really done that kind of world building in my own work yet. But I am attracted to the idea of the hero's journey that everybody knows about now from Joseph Campbell and his influence on so many films and stories. I don't follow that as any kind of rigid template, but it's to me an interesting, even when I'm working within the Cthulhu mythos and I'm dealing with themes related to whether or not mankind has any significance, what is it that gives human life value, playing with these sort of nihilistic ideas and possibilities and letting my characters contemplate those and maybe despair at those. At the same time, I am incorporating elements of myth and fable in the more traditional sense. And that's, like music, you can invert those things. You can play with those riffs in unexpected ways, like can a villain have a hero's journey, and what does that look like? So I don't stick to the template, but I do like looking at things through that lens often.
Interesting. Have you read any Charles DeLint? Are you familiar with him at all?
I haven't read him yet, no, but I know the name.
Yeah, I don't know if he would be called fabulism, so urban fantasy. It's like the stuff that's happening today, like we're having a conversation, but there's a spirit in the wires, or there's a brownie that lives in the kitchen, and the main character kind of gets sucked up into this, other weird thing that's happening. Yeah, I no offense, favorite author. I love him.
Cool. No, it could be. I don't expect to be.
Yeah.
That's one of many names on a list that I am trying to get to. So one more point for Charles. I will try to check it out. What do you recommend for a newcomer? What's a good starting point?
The first book I ever read by him was Moonheart, and I tell you, I had the trade paperback. By the time I reached the bottom of the first page, I was completely in the story.
Cool.
Just completely blew me away. But everything he writes is just it's so wonderful. And I don't know. I'm a fanboy, so I guess take it for what it's worth. But everything that he writes, there's one or two that maybe aren't, I don't like as much as maybe some of the other ones, but it always gets you in the feels too. I admit this on the air, but I can't read one of his book and not tear up at some point.
Wow.
While I'm reading the story, because you get so involved with the characters and the journeys that they're going through and the things that are happening, and then have some sort of resolution to those things. It's so cathartic, and sometimes the things are not good. But he does it really well.
I'm gonna have to dive in. I think I think after my first book, I think a friend recommended him as someone he thought I would have some affinity with. So I will check that out. Thank you for the tip.
Cool. I'll have to throw a link in the show notes, I guess, for that too.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Well, I made a note. Moonheart.
Cool. So we consider Lovecraft the granddaddy of weird fiction, but it has its roots more in that Gothic fiction of like the 1800s. So is it an inversion of that? Like, is it just like a natural outcome of that sort of weird ghost story kind of thing, do you think?
Only to a certain extent, is my opinion on that. Lovecraft was strongly influenced by Edgar Allan Poe, and you've got some overlap there where characters are dealing with madness, where there may be questions of an unreliable narrator, although I think less so with Lovecraft. He's got that very journalistic feel that the character is just trying to document things as clearly as possible, as bizarre as they may seem, and one of his goals was to basically make each story like an effective hoax, where there would be a certain amount of realism and all of the data that creates the sense that that weird element is even weirder because of its juxtaposition against all of that, but that it's somehow it goes down easier too because you bought into the world. I think Stephen King does a great job of that in a very different way, with an entirely different economy of language, and an entirely different capacity for character development. But Lovecraft, he went through phases too, like any writer. He's got all that Lord Dunsany influenced stuff, that sort of subgenre within his own work of fantasy, dream world stuff. But I think the reason I think we're still talking about Lovecraft today, in spite of some of his blind spots as a writer, some of his technical shortcomings as a writer, and he's masterful at some things. I enjoy his work. It's why I'm still reading. It's why it's had such an influence on me. But I think he did something kind of new when it's not the paradigm, the worldview of a ghost story, of a supernatural story, is often religious, and if you buy into, if you go back to Bram Stoker, you've got a way of understanding how to actually kill the vampire. The tools of the church are your weapons, right? Lovecraft comes along and sweeps all that off the table, and just with cosmic, he's writing at the time when Einstein is rewriting the rules of the universe, and he's saying, we know nothing, and the idea that we could protect ourselves against dark things that might lurk between the stars is ridiculous. So that's what is so important about his work, and where it really extends way beyond the Gothic tradition that may have initially influenced him. Okay.
Yeah, I just find it's interesting to ask these questions to guys like you, because I certainly don't know. So to be able to get your take on it is interesting for me, and hopefully for everybody else as well.
I'm good at regurgitating things I've heard smarter people say too. So that's my talent.
There you go. What makes a story Lovecraftian? I mean, is it like your Spectre series is like just full out, give me all the mythos, we're going to do all the stuff. Do we need that and tentacles and monsters, or is it more of a theme or feeling?
Right. I mean, I wanted to play with the mythos more than I wanted to play with zombies or vampires. I wanted to reimagine the Cthulhu mythos kind of in my own semi-futuristic terms, in part so that I could have a bit of that interplay with Lovecraft's own body of work, and with some of the things that are problematic about him as a thinker, as a person. That was a self-conscious decision. A lot of other writers have done similar things recently. Victor LaValle is a great example of doing that brilliantly in Ballad of Black Tom, which deals with the horror at Red Hook and some of Lovecraft's racism. There's it's almost becoming a genre unto itself to write Lovecraftian stories as commentary on Lovecraft. And again, I didn't want, I wanted to do that in subtle ways by setting the parameters of the story with certain kinds of characters and certain kinds of settings. But no, absolutely not. To be what we would call Lovecraftian, a story doesn't have to use Cthulhu. It doesn't have to use the tentacles, the monsters. It doesn't have to make reference to the Necronomicon. I think most of the best weird fiction that's out there right now, you might say that someone like Laird Barron is Lovecraftian. Certainly, he's been influenced by him, and at times he's dabbled in more overt Lovecraftian stuff. But it's really the sense of dread, the anxiety, the unsettling feeling that things are unhinged, that the characters don't understand what they've gotten into, that unnameable forces lurk, just beyond what you think about reality. That to me is what makes things that's what makes the story Lovecraftian, or if you want to call it weird. Whether or not you've got the tropes and all those trappings in there. Sure.
And unfortunately that, seems to echo, our daily lives more and more every day. You watch the news and whatever, and that, sense of hopelessness and nihilism. And,
right.
It's almost like it's not even it's like, well, at least it's not as fucked up as this,
Right. That's a question that I brought up at Nikon this summer. We were doing a panel. I was on a panel with Laird and John Langan, and he's another brilliant writer you could classify as weird fiction. Fisherman was like my favorite book of last year. And that is not Lovecraftian in any of the name-dropping ways, but it very much is as just a really well-developed occult, mythic sort of story. But yeah, the question that I had for those guys was, is it harder to be weird? Is it harder to be effective as a weird fiction writer when the world is so fucking weird right now? I mean, it's like, is there even a desire for among the culture at large? Is there a desire for weirdness at times when we just wish that reality itself was a little less weird? And I don't think I didn't really get an answer to that at the time. I don't have one for you. But I do think that people find some kind of therapeutic value in horror fiction and in fantasy fiction, especially in difficult times and uncertain times. I think we want a little perspective. Like, at least it's not as bad as, at least I'm having my coffee and I'm not getting eaten by something. I'm not losing my mind. But yeah, these stories can also help us to, like stories have always done since the campfire. Stories have helped us imagine ways that we might try to make sense of a chaotic world, ways that we might try to find resilience against loss and grief and horror and cultish behavior.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned horror. Do you think that horror gets a bad rap as an art form? Sometimes you get that feeling like it's just not as worthy. It's not literature. It's not, Mother just came out, and whether or not you think it's a good movie or not, you just think, oh, it's a brilliant masterpiece or whatever, and then that's not a horror film. That's drama, or they want to categorize it as something else because they don't want to own that. Like, no, this is straight up, a horror. It's a horrific thing. Do you think that there's some disconnect there in the community of literature and entertainment, as far as movies and things?
Yeah, there's horror has a horrible reputation, and I don't see that being redeemed a whole lot. Again, it's easy in an insulated community of people who love it to feel like we've come a long way or something. I mean, we've come some way. Right now there's a real renaissance of low budget horror films, just as we've got small presses doing a lot of interesting things with fiction. Netflix streaming has completely opened up the doors to funding for a lot of great horror. There's a lot of crappy horror, and there always will be.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's going to trickle down, if we're going to see more mainstream interest in horror fiction, which is already, I try to keep in perspective too, that even reading is, just because everyone I know loves it,
Yeah.
doesn't mean that it's the most popular pastime right now. There's so much entertainment competing for people's time right now. And, a lot of that is in the little computer in everybody's pocket. But I don't know, my friend Paul Tremblay said, no genre is as defined by its failures as horror is. And to me, that just says it all. You mentioned horror, and people who might love a great horror novel and they just don't know it, the first thing they picture is just the bloodiest, schlockiest slasher film they ever saw a trailer for. And it's really hard to get beyond that and convince people that that this is not just some titillating, dirty little sideshow of culture. This is a big part of the main event. Ever since the Greek myths, ever since Shakespeare, was incorporating fantasy elements, writing Macbeth, writing tragedy. This is tragedy. This is how people confront death, confront mortality, have, a way of examining possibilities about the afterlife. What could be more central to our lives than stories that do that? So it pisses me off that there's snobbery toward horror still. I think Stephen King has done a lot to break down some of those barriers by influencing an entire generation of creators, of filmmakers, of storytellers. Fucking everybody is, just as J.K. Rowling influenced an entire generation. I think maybe just by being great, some of those artists are making a good case that this stuff should be taken a little more seriously, even though we're in it to have fun, I hope.
Mm-hmm. But and you hope stuff like Jordan Peele's Get Out, things like that, which you can classify them as whatever, but it's still at its core, more of a horror, a road, a trip down that road of horror than it is anything else.
Yeah, it plays horror to the hilt. It's very aware of its aims as a horror film, but maybe it's obviously it succeeds because it's not being coy at all about also having a huge social commentary in its premise, right?
Right.
So yeah, I love that movie.
Yeah, I didn't actually see it. I've heard great things about it, but I haven't actually seen it.
Highly recommended. Yeah, the version I saw on, maybe it was Amazon Prime, had an alternate ending also, and now I forget which was the theatrical ending. There's a commentary there about why they considered the other ending, what they planned, what they hoped to accomplish with it, and why they changed it. I think I liked the original ending better, if I've got it right.
Right. And you wonder how much, the studio, they go out and they preview the movies. Like the original Clerks, Dante gets shot. Like that's the end of the movie. Like how fucked up is that? And you wonder, like, it just doesn't play well in the theater. But sometimes, like, I enjoy something that leaves you like, damn, really? Like, that's it? Like it gives you a totally different experience that's, entirely valid, maybe not as satisfying. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. Everything just worked out, because everything doesn't always work out. And sometimes, you need to have that reinforced, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it's me.
I totally agree. We've been so conditioned. It's just like, again, to bring things back to music, I have often wondered, do certain chords and intervals and resolutions of harmony in music, do they work because ever since you're a baby, you've heard these patterns over and over again, right? So is it learned? Is it nurture, right? Or is there something about the nature of sound where, clearly dissonance, the mathematical relationships of dissonant notes is very different from harmonious notes. Is there something inherent in that structure that mimics the structures of other symmetrical and harmonious things in nature, patterns that we find even in the development of the human brain, right? But when it comes to story structures, also we've been conditioned so much to expect the resolution and the happy ending. That good will prevail, and yeah, it's good to get the sucker punch every now and then, and be reminded that I think we go to stories because in life we don't have those reassurances. We want it, rightly so, from make-believe a lot of the time, but we shouldn't get it every time. And I always feel like if I can't make readers worry and wonder whether or not they're gonna, whether or not everybody's gonna come out okay, if it's too safe, I'm not doing my job, certainly, as a horror writer. But I remember, are you muted?
I am. The cat hit the button on the thing.
Okay.
No, I was gonna say it's like gaming to a certain extent in that regard. Like nobody wants a TPK, but sometimes you need a TPK. Otherwise, like, what are you doing? You just show up. There's never any, drama inherent in anything that you're doing if nothing is ever really going to happen, So
I remember having to explain to my son when he was going through the Disney movie phase that, well, this, they get, kids get really wound up. They're supposed to. He didn't want to watch, you get to that moment of crisis at the 3/4 mark. And I really had to explain it to him in storyteller terms and just be like, look, pause the thing. Look at where the, where the bar is right now. You're 3/4 of the way through this story. And that's where they always make you worry that everything's gone wrong. And, like every other movie you've seen, next they're going to overcome, so it's formulaic, but it's, for a reason, I guess.
Yeah, well, Disney might not be the best example because it's horrible from the start. Bambi's father's shot, dead. The mother's shot. Dumbo's, single parent. Like everything is horrible. Like Disney hates your parents.
Oh, absolutely. And we talked about that too. Me and my kid talked about how, it's always orphans. It's always kids whose parents get whacked in the beginning because that, if your parents are taking care of you, how are you going to have any drama? How are you going to have any tension? How are you going to have an adventure? If we're going to find inner strength and some kind of journey towards heroism and self-sufficiency, yeah, we've got to take away the support system. We talked about that at a convention too, about apocalyptic fiction is sort of like taking away the support system of society itself, right, of government or whatever. It's sort of like a surrogate for killing the parent in the Disney movie. But my boy got to the point where we'd put on a movie and he could sense within the first few minutes, like, oh shit, this is going to be one of those, I don't want to see it, turn it off, turn it off. I'd be like, what? I forget what movie we were watching, but it was literally like 1 minute into it, and there's parents in a car with a kid, and there's nothing going on that isn't perfectly ordinary. And he's like, no, I don't want to see this kind of movie, turn it off. I'm like, oh, it just started. Let's just give it a try, right? Literally 30 seconds later, bam! Car crash, flips over, dead parents. So I can't blame him.
But you didn't take him to see Annabelle, did you?
No, this might have been Pete's Dragon or something. We didn't watch it after that, so it's a little vague to me now.
My daughter and her boyfriend wanted to go see Annabelle Creation or whatever it was. I was going to go see Dunkirk because they started about the same time, and we got there a little late, and I was missing the beginning. I was like, screw it. I'll just go see Annabelle. And, like, that's the beginning of the movie. Like, parents dead, or no, the kid died. The kid died. Oh, spoilers. So it's already been out for a couple of months. Yeah, so, like, same sort of thing, just kind of like, I mean, you knew something bad was going to happen. It's a horror movie, but
right.
Yeah, it was sort of that like normal, like whatever scene, and horrible thing happens, and then more horrible things happen along the way. So,
right,
yeah. we're talking about game, or I'm talking about gaming a little bit. Your Spectre series reminds me a little bit of Delta Green, at least tangentially, like, monolithic, secret government organization that's dealing with these weird, mythos things or whatever horrible things. Have you ever played Delta Green, or are you a gamer at all yourself? Call it Cthulhu or anything?
No, I'm not a gamer. I'm curious. I wish, if I had more time on my hands. I wish I had more time for video games too. I would like to play Call of Cthulhu. I'd like to, check that out. I became aware of Delta Green after writing the first Spectre book, Red Equinox. I was on the Lovecraft Easy, and they started saying, this reminds us of Delta Green, and I was like, all right, well, I need to write that down and look it up. Also, the Laundry Files, not that that's gaming related, but that gets mentioned a bit as a government agency dealing with Cthulhu mythos type stuff. Although there's a lot more humor in Strauss's take on that, in fine British form there. So no, not really influenced by Delta Green, but curious about it. Cool.
Yeah, we had Shane on when the Kickstarter was out, I guess last year, I suppose. It's really dark. Like, I knew it was dark, and then he sent me the PDF, and I started going through it. I'm like, wow, this is fucked up. Like, cool. Really, really bad. Really good, but bad.
Okay.
In a gaming sense. Yeah. Definitely worth checking it out. Maybe you get some time. Maybe we get you in on a game.
Yeah, see, I feel like I would be just the biggest bummer to have involved because I know nothing, and you have to spend all your time training me, educating me. I don't know. My son wants to try Dungeons and Dragons with the dice, which I haven't played since I was a teen. So I may find my way back to gaming by introducing him to that at some point.
That's awesome. I've been trying to get my kid to play since 4th edition came out in 2008 when we jumped back into it, and she's resisted every attempt. And then a couple of months ago, she was like, "Where's your book set? I want to look. I think I want to play it." I'm like, "Oh yes!" So I started building terrain. I bought books for 5th edition and all this stuff. Yeah, we haven't played.
You have to.
I want to. Yeah. So I even had one of my GMs like, "Hey, I'll run a game. I'll run a one shot. Tell her, jump on. We'll do a thing." And she's like, "I don't know if I want to do that." I'm like, "Oh, come on!
You got all these resources. She should take advantage of it."
I know. That's what I'm saying. I would love it.
When and where else is she going to get that opportunity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and and that's the thing. Like, you do it, and if you don't like it, then you don't like it, and you move on from that, and maybe you don't give it a second thought. But she loves to write. She reads. She's in. She does fanfic and all this kind of stuff. So I think she would absolutely love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Got to give it a try.
Yeah, one of these days. I don't want to push too hard because then it'd be like, I told you I'm not doing it. Forget it.
Yeah.
No.
That's the parental balancing act.
Yeah, for sure. What are you reading these days? Anything fun and exciting?
Boy, I've got a pile that that is very, very exciting, but if I ever get to them all, what happened to me was I tried, like so many of my friends into horror who were influenced by King growing up. I thought I would reread it before the film came out, and it's 1,000 pages long.
Oh yeah,
at least. My wife got me the really cool Cemetery Dance 25th anniversary hardcover edition, right? So that sat in the slipcase for a long time, and I finally started getting into it over the summer. But I also had conventions over the summer and trying to finish a book over the summer. And then I was reading something to blurb for somebody. So it's been a real crawl. I'm only like 350 pages into it, and like not much happens in the first couple hundred pages. So I saw the movie. I enjoyed it. But I am still slowly wading through what I know I'm going to love. It's the 3rd time I've read it. But I haven't read it since the 90s, so it's kind of fresh again. I'm rediscovering that. That has put a lot of other books that are in my TBR pile on hold for now. And there's always there's stuff I'm really curious about that I'll never get to. And there's books by friends that I feel guilty I haven't gotten to, even though I'm sure they're great. But what else? I mean, I've got to have something interesting I can mention besides it.
It's topical.
I recently read The Weird Company by Pete Rawlik. That was really good.
Nice.
I loved Swift to Chase by Laird Barron. I read that not long ago. I mentioned The Fisherman by John Langan. I've got experimental film by Gemma Files. I'm looking at that right here on my pile of things that I am chomping at the bit to get to. The Forgotten Girl by Rio Ures was a great supernatural thriller, and that came out a few months back. Highly recommend that.
Cool. I'm reading one of Pete's books too, and the name escapes me at the moment. It's the Herbert West collection. I think it was put out by Chaosium.
Yeah, okay, an anthology. Pete edited that, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, he's great with the Reanimator stuff.
Yep. I'm trying to make up for lost time now since I didn't have enough weird fiction in my my collection.
Sure.
I said to Cody, I feel like such a fraud. Like, you've been on the show, we've played a game together. Like, I don't have any of your books. Like, give me a couple of books. Give me anything.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, we probably do this for another hour or two, but I guess it's probably getting late for you.
Yeah, I get up early in the morning. But thanks for having me on. It's been really fun. You had great questions. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
I try to be as prepared as I can be. Because sometimes it's not often, but sometimes you get a guest that is not very verbose, and it's like, ooh, okay. Good thing I have a lot of things prepared for today.
Well, writers usually just all I have to do is open their mouth and words will fall out, right?
Game designers too.
Yeah.
Cool. I appreciate you coming on. This was a blast having you on and getting a chance to hang out and just kind of chew the fat for a little while.
Yeah, great time. Thanks again for letting me plug the new book. I hope some people will check out the trilogy, and I look forward to meeting you again at the next Necronomicon and having a beer in person.
Absolutely. And the name of that book is Cthulhu Blues. It's put out by Journal Stone Press. There's a link in the show notes. You can pick that up on Amazon right now. It's available. So go ahead. You can do that. We'll wait as we're getting ready to wind the show up. Go ahead and, throw it in your cart. It's fine. Got a couple of minutes here. Or do later, whatever you want to do. Just make sure you pick it up. Pick up the other two books too, Red Equinox and Black January. You're not going to be disappointed. They're a ton of fun, full-on Lovecraftian. It's a thrill-a-minute joyride.
Thanks, John.
Absolutely. Before I let you go, I'm going to throw out all of our details as well. You can find this and all of our other awesome content at legendsoftabletop.com. We're on Twitter at legendstabletop. You can find us on Instagram, YouTube. We're all over the place. Just punch us into Google. You'll find us. Ratings and reviews on iTunes and things like Podchaser or whatever your podcatcher of choice is are super helpful, just like those Amazon reviews for Doug Wynne. When you leave reviews for the podcast, that helps us become a little bit more visible, brings more people to the show. So we appreciate when you do that. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your grandmother. She might find something on there she likes. You never know. Maybe she played D&D back in the early 80s when she was a young lass. So please do that. We appreciate it. Thanks again to Doug for coming on. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, John.
All right. And we'll catch you all next time.